Connor "Blade" Riley and Dritan Leka stood on opposite sides of Liverpool's Underworld, two forces colliding in a violent war that would change the city forever. One sought control through fear, the other through strategy, and in their deadly clash, no one was safe. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of gang crime story, and watch till end. Liverpool had always been a city of hidden corners and dark alleys, where street gangs ruled territories with a mix of fear and respect. But in the winter of 2024, a new shadow crept into the city, one that the locals could neither predict nor control. Dritan Leka, an Albanian Mafia king whose reputation had spread across Europe like wildfire, arrived quietly, bringing with him a calculated menace that unsettled even the most hardened criminals. Unlike the ragged street gangs who relied on numbers and brute strength, Dritan was precise, patient, and terrifyingly intelligent. His movements were silent, almost ghost-like, but the results were unmistakable. Small shipments of drugs, previously monopolized by Liverpool gangs, began disappearing from the streets, only to reappear under his control, cleaner, more potent, and impossible to trace back to him. At first it seemed almost accidental. The Harrington crew, one of Liverpool's oldest and most feared street gangs, noticed gaps in their shipments but wrote them off as bad luck or police interference. Connor "Blade" Riley, their leader, was known for his hot temper and impulsive decisions, but even he was cautious in these first few weeks. Rumors started circulating of a new player in the city, but few could believe a foreign mafia would risk stepping onto Liverpool's soil so boldly. Dritan's men were careful. They left no obvious trail, no unnecessary violence, and operated with a chilling efficiency. Yet the city felt the shift. Late one night, scouts for the Harrington crew stumbled upon a meeting in a deserted warehouse near the docks. What they saw shook them to their core. Men who were clearly well-trained, some bearing marks of European criminal organizations, were unloading drugs and counting stacks of cash with meticulous attention. Dritan was nowhere in sight, but the order and discipline were unmistakable. These were not ordinary street criminals. This was an organized syndicate with a clear strategy and resources far beyond anything the local gangs had ever faced. As the weeks passed, tensions simmered. Small confrontations began in back alleys, threats, stolen shipments, and warning shots. But each incident only highlighted the contrast in strategy. While Connor relied on muscle and intimidation, Dritan's operations were calculated, designed to inflict maximum damage while keeping his own men safe. By the end of the month, the Harrington crew had lost several minor territories without firing a single gun. Liverpool's streets were no longer controlled solely by local gangs. The Albanian Mafia had silently inserted itself into the heart of the underworld. Fear began to take root. Ordinary residents whispered about mysterious figures in dark coats near warehouses, about vehicles with foreign plates, and about the sudden disappearance of long-time street dealers. Gang members too felt the invisible hand of Dritan's control. Some began to question their loyalty, knowing that betrayal could be profitable, or worse, necessary for survival. Connor realized that the city he had ruled through dominance and terror was no longer his alone. Something far more dangerous had arrived, and it was only a matter of time before the first real blood was spilled. The tension on Liverpool's streets had reached a breaking point. The Harrington crew, once feared and respected, could no longer operate with confidence. Connor "Blade" Riley paced the floors of his safe house, frustration and anger simmering beneath the surface. The shipments that had kept his crew in power were disappearing, and every attempt to investigate only led to dead ends. His scouts returned with grim reports. Unfamiliar faces, disciplined and unyielding, patrolling territories that had always belonged to local gangs. It was clear to Connor that this was no ordinary threat. This was a war strategy carefully designed to weaken him and his allies. Connor decided to send a small team to follow one of the new players, hoping to uncover the source of these disruptions. The streets at night were eerily quiet, lit only by the dim glow of street lamps and neon signs. As the team tailed a black van with European plates, the men noticed the precision of their target's movements. Every turn was calculated, every stop brief, and every potential witness avoided. When the van finally stopped at a deserted warehouse near the waterfront, the team watched in disbelief. Dritan Leka's men unloaded crates with an efficiency that rivaled a military operation. No wasted motion, no careless chatter, just perfect coordination. Connor realized this wasn't just a gang moving in. It was an organization that understood tactics, surveillance, and theological warfare. Unlike Liverpool gangs, who thrived on intimidation and brute force, Dritan's men were patient and meticulous. They left no evidence, no mark of violence, only the silent message that control had shifted. The team returned with photographs and descriptions, but even then, the gravity of the situation didn't fully settle in. Connor knew that confronting these men with sheer force would be suicidal, yet doing nothing meant losing everything he had fought for. The Harrington crew tried to reclaim their territories subtly, intercepting minor shipments and confronting low-level operatives, but each attempt backfired. Dritan's men had anticipated these moves, setting traps that exposed the weaknesses of Liverpool's street gangs. A routine ambush turned disastrous when a small unit of Connor's men walked straight into an organized attack. Several were injured, and one did not survive. Fear and uncertainty spread among the ranks. Loyalty was tested as gang members began questioning Connor's ability to lead in the face of this unprecedented threat. As the days passed, the city itself felt the shift. Drug prices fluctuated. New players avoided known gang territories, and rumors spread of a foreign kingpin who controlled the flow of narcotics with an iron grip. Ordinary citizens began noticing strange vehicles parked in quiet areas, unfamiliar faces watching from shadows, and the sudden disappearance of petty criminals who had crossed the wrong people. Dritan's presence was invisible yet undeniable, and it instilled a creeping paranoia throughout Liverpool. Connor convened a secret meeting of his closest allies, realizing that traditional methods of dominance were no longer enough. He needed a strategy, but the challenge was immense. Dritan was not just strong. He was smarter, faster, and willing to strike without warning. The streets that had once obeyed Connor's commands were now silent battlegrounds, where every decision could mean survival or death. Liverpool's underworld was changing, and Connor understood that this was only the beginning. The war was no longer about control of a neighborhood or a shipment. It was about survival against a calculated enemy who played chess while the gangs played checkers. The night the first blood was shed, Liverpool's streets seemed quieter than ever. But underneath the calm lay a deadly tension. Connor Blade Riley had been preparing his crew for retaliation, but the Albanian Mafia had already anticipated his moves. The Harrington crew gathered near the docks, inspecting a shipment they hoped would reclaim some lost ground, unaware that Dritan Leka's men were already lying in wait. The air smelled of salt and diesel, but mingled with it was something more ominous. An unspoken sense of impending violence that made even the toughest men uneasy. As the crew approached the crates, a series of muffled sounds erupted from the shadows. Figures emerged silently, weapons gleaming under the faint moonlight, moving with uncanny precision. There was no warning, no chance for negotiation. The ambush was perfect. Bullets tore through the night, shattering crates and sending men scrambling for cover. Chaos erupted, but the Albanian Mafia's coordination made escape nearly impossible. Several of Connor's men were injured instantly, and one, a loyal lieutenant named Eddie Knuckles Malone, was killed before anyone could react. The Harrington crew had been trained for street fights and small skirmishes, but this was war on a different scale, and they were outmatched. Connor watched from a shadowed corner, fury and disbelief mingling with fear. Dritan's men moved like shadows, striking swiftly and retreating before any response could be organized. Every attempt to fight back only exposed the crew to more danger. By the time the attack ended, the Harrington crew had suffered heavy losses, their reputation for dominance shaken. Liverpool's underworld suddenly realized that Dritan Leka was not just a new player. He was a tactical genius capable of planning and executing attacks that few could survive. The city itself seemed to hold its breath in the aftermath. News of the ambush spread quickly through whispers in back alleys, graffiti marking territories with warnings, and cryptic messages left for rival gangs. Even those uninvolved in criminal activity sensed the change. Dritan's arrival had transformed Liverpool from a city of territorial squabbles into a battlefield ruled by strategy, fear, and meticulous planning. Gang members who had once laughed at foreign competitors now understood the lethal seriousness of the threat. Connor tried to rally his remaining men, urging them to plan counterattacks, but doubt had already seeped into their ranks. Some questioned whether loyalty to him was worth the risk. Others suggested retreating, abandoning neighborhoods they had fought for over decades. The psychological toll of the ambush was devastating, and Connor realized that brute force alone would no longer suffice. He needed intelligence, patience, and a plan that could outsmart Dritan rather than simply overpower him. At the same time, Dritan remained unseen, a shadow controlling events from afar. The effectiveness of the ambush was not just in the violence, but in the message it sent. This war would be fought on his terms, and anyone attempting to challenge him would suffer immediate consequences. Even local law enforcement, previously dismissive of gang disputes, began to take notice, documenting the bodies and noting the level of coordination in the attack. By dawn, Liverpool's streets returned to their usual rhythm, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Connor surveyed the aftermath, counting the losses, and felt a grim understanding settle in. This was only the beginning. The Harrington crew had survived, but the balance of power had shifted. Dritan Leka had proven that he was not just a rival, he was a force capable of reshaping the criminal landscape entirely, and Connor now faced a war unlike any he had ever imagined. The first blood had been spilled, and with it came a chilling certainty. No one in Liverpool would ever see the streets the same way again. Connor Blade Riley knew that after the ambush, surviving on instinct alone would not be enough. The streets of Liverpool had changed overnight, and every corner, alley, and warehouse could hide a threat. He called a secret meeting with his closest allies in a rundown safe house on the outskirts of the city. The room was dimly lit, cigarette smoke curling through the air as men silently analyzed the situation. Losses had been heavy, morale was fragile, and the realization that Dritan Leka's power extended further than anyone had imagined weighed on everyone present. Connor's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan that could turn the tide without throwing his men into another slaughter. He began by re-evaluating the crew's alliances. Many smaller gangs had traditionally owed loyalty to the Harrington crew, but the news of Dritan's attack had shaken their confidence. Whispers of a foreign kingpin spreading his influence through the city were enough to make some allies question where their loyalties lay. Connor realized that any misstep could cost him more than territory. It could cost lives. To secure intelligence, he deployed trusted scouts to observe Dritan's movements, mapping the Albanian Mafia's routines and supply lines. Every detail mattered, but even with careful planning, Connor faced the harsh truth of betrayal. One of his lieutenants, Toby Switch Donovan, had been unusually quiet since the ambush. Connor had always trusted him implicitly, but subtle signs, a missing report, unexplained absences, sparked suspicion. When Connor confronted Toby privately, the man's hesitation confirmed his worst fears. Toby had been feeding information to Dritan's men, hoping to protect his own future as the balance of power shifted. The sense of betrayal cut deep. A reminder that in this war, threats came not only from outside, but from within. Connor had no choice but to remove Toby from any position of influence immediately, sending a stark message to the rest of his crew. Loyalty was life, and treachery would be punished. Meanwhile, Dritan Leka continued his silent campaign, never showing himself directly, but orchestrating a series of moves that kept Liverpool gangs off balance. His men intercepted shipments, spread misinformation, and created fear without overt confrontation. Each small victory for Dritan weakened the cohesion of the Harrington crew, forcing Connor to adapt. He realized that brute force could no longer secure dominance. He needed intelligence, strategy, and alliances that extended beyond the streets he had once ruled unquestioned. Connor's solution was to form a covert network of loyal insiders in rival gangs. offering protection and profit in exchange for information on Dritan's operations. It was risky, trust was fragile, and any betrayal could be catastrophic, but it allowed him to anticipate attacks before they happened. Night after night, he and his most trusted men studied the city from shadows, piecing together a map of Dritan's influence. By the end of the week, a new tension gripped the streets. Connor had regained a measure of control, but the cost had been high, and the presence of betrayal lingered like a shadow over every move. Liverpool was no longer a city where dominance came from fear alone. It was a chessboard, and each decision carried consequences. Connor understood that the next confrontation would not just be about territory or shipments. It would be about intelligence, deception, and survival. The war with the Albanian Mafia was escalating, and every choice from this point forward would determine whether he and his crew would endure or be erased from the city's underworld forever. The violence on Liverpool streets had not gone unnoticed for long. What began as turf disputes and ambushes now resembled the operations of an organized syndicate, and law enforcement could no longer turn a blind eye. Federal agents from the U.S. tracking the flow of high-grade narcotics, coordinated with Scotland Yard to investigate the mysterious influx of shipments tied to the Albanian Mafia. For the first time, the Harrington crew and Dritan Leka's operations were intersecting with authorities who had the resources and determination to intervene. Connor Blade Riley understood that this added another layer of danger. Every move he made would now be scrutinized, and mistakes could be fatal. The agents quickly realized that Dritan was not an ordinary criminal. Surveillance footage, intercepted communications, and forensic evidence revealed a network of warehouses, front businesses, and trusted associates spanning multiple cities. Yet, despite the scale of the investigation, Dritan remained elusive. Every time authorities closed in on a warehouse or followed a lead, the Mafia king had already relocated, leaving only shadows and questions behind. Connor noted the law's presence in the city as both a potential threat and an opportunity. If manipulated correctly, it could be used to pressure Dritan indirectly, forcing him into mistakes. Meanwhile, tension within the Harrington crew reached new heights. Some members suggested laying low to avoid law enforcement scrutiny, while others pushed for aggressive strikes against Dritan's operations to regain lost ground. Connor had to balance ambition with caution, knowing that a single misstep could result in arrests or casualties. He decided to act covertly, sending trusted scouts to observe shipments while keeping the larger operations hidden from the authorities. Every move became a delicate game of deception, with survival hanging in the balance. Dritan's reach extended further than Connor had anticipated. He had spies not only among rival gangs but also in local businesses, and even law enforcement circles. Rumors began circulating that some minor officers were taking bribes or ignoring suspicious activity, though nothing could be proven. The Albanian Mafia's strategy was clear: weaken the competition, manipulate the system, and remain untouchable. Liverpool, once familiar and navigable, now felt like a maze where every step could lead to ambush, arrest, or worse. Connor understood that he could not fight Dritan alone, nor could he rely solely on intimidation or force. He began to study patterns, tracking shipments, noting routes, and predicting Dritan's next moves. Each intercepted message, each observed behavior became a piece of a larger puzzle. The goal was not to confront Dritan directly, but to force him into a situation where mistakes could be exploited. The stakes had never been higher. With law enforcement circling closer, Dritan's men growing bolder and internal trust fragile, Connor faced a war on multiple fronts. Every decision was critical. Every failed move could be fatal. Liverpool's streets were no longer a playground for local gangs. They had become a battlefield, where strategy, intelligence, and survival were more important than loyalty or brute force. Connor realized that the coming weeks would determine the fate of his crew and the balance of power in the city. In this war there were no second chances, and every shadow could conceal a threat or an opportunity. The lines between law, loyalty, and survival blurred, and Liverpool's underworld teetered on the edge of chaos. Connor Blade Riley knew that brute force alone would not defeat Dritan Leka. After repeated ambushes, betrayals, and the encroaching presence of law enforcement, it became clear that survival depended on strategy, intelligence, and unexpected alliances. He turned to someone he had long considered an unpredictable wild card, Selina Viper Hayes, a former gang rival with deep knowledge of international criminal networks. Selina had once ruled parts of Liverpool's East Side and had connections in Europe that rivaled Dritan. Though their past was filled with distrust and past betrayals, desperation left Connor no choice but to approach her. The meeting took place in a deserted warehouse near the docks. Far from prying eyes, Selina listened quietly as Connor outlined the threat posed by Dritan. Her expression was unreadable, but her sharp eyes betrayed calculation. She agreed to help, though only if her involvement remained limited and profitable. Connor had no illusions about her motives. Trust was a luxury he could not afford, but he needed her expertise to anticipate Dritan's next moves. Together, they began mapping out the Albanian Mafia's operations, identifying weak points and potential vulnerabilities. Their first coordinated plan was audacious. Selina provided information on a major shipment scheduled to pass through Liverpool, one of Dritan's most critical operations. Connor assembled a team, combining his loyal crew with Selina's small group of mercenaries. The plan was simple but dangerous: intercept the shipment, gather intelligence, and send a clear message that Dritan's control could be challenged. Every member knew the stakes. Failure could mean death, not just for them but for anyone associated with the operation. As night fell, the combined teams moved into position, shadows slipping along the docks as if part of the darkness itself. Initial moments were tense but promising. They managed to intercept part of the shipment, securing crates and documents that revealed Dritan's broader network. It seemed like the first real victory in months, a sign that the tide might be turning. But Dritan had anticipated that someone would attempt to strike at him. From the shadows, his men emerged with precision, cutting off escape routes and forcing a chaotic retreat. Several of Selina's mercenaries were injured, and a key lieutenant disappeared, leaving a chilling reminder that Dritan's reach was vast. The failed operation was a sobering lesson. Success had been partial, and the retaliation demonstrated just how far Dritan would go to maintain control. Yet, Connor refused to give up. He and Selina regrouped, analyzing the intelligence they had managed to seize. Patterns emerged, route schedules and hidden connections that could be exploited in future operations. The mission had failed tactically, but succeeded strategically, providing insight into Dritan's methods that no previous confrontation had revealed. Liverpool's streets felt the tension rising. Rumors of the failed ambush and the survivors' narrow escape spread quickly among gangs, dealers, and local informants. Fear mixed with awe as word of Dritan's omnipresent influence traveled faster than any official report. Connor realized that every alliance, every plan, and every calculated move was a step toward a larger war. The Albanian Mafia king was clever, ruthless, and unyielding, but Connor now had a powerful ally in Selina Hayes. Together, they would continue to probe the edges of his empire, seeking weaknesses and preparing for the decisive moves that could finally challenge his dominance. Connor Blade Riley had spent weeks studying patterns, analyzing intelligence, and coordinating with Selina Viper Hayes to uncover weaknesses in Dritan Leka's operations. Every intercepted shipment, every observation of movement, and every whispered rumor became a piece of the puzzle. For the first time since the Albanian Mafia had arrived, Connor felt that he might be able to turn the tables. He knew that brute force had failed repeatedly, but precise, carefully gathered intelligence could give him an edge. It was time to act, but the risk was immense. One wrong step could undo everything they had built. The plan was audacious. Connor identified a series of warehouses used by Dritan to store drugs and launder money. The locations were spread across the U.S., coordinated remotely through trusted lieutenants. Using the information gained from previous operations and surveillance, Connor and Selina coordinated a simultaneous strike. The goal was not to engage Dritan directly, but to cripple his supply network, disrupt his financial channels, and arrest or eliminate key lieutenants. Timing was critical, and precision was everything. Every member of Connor's crew understood that failure meant death, but the potential reward, a chance to reclaim control of Liverpool, was worth the risk. As night fell, teams moved into position, shadows blending seamlessly with the darkness of the industrial zones. Connor's heart raced, but he maintained his focus. The first warehouses were approached quietly, surveillance cameras disabled, and entrances secured. For the first time in months, operations unfolded exactly as planned. Dritan's men were caught off guard, scrambling to respond, while Connor's crew moved efficiently, taking control of the sites. Documents, shipment records, and cash were seized, creating chaos within the Albanian Mafia's hierarchy. The success of the initial strike sent shockwaves through Dritan's network. Rumors of raids spread quickly, and panic began to ripple through his associates. Connor used the chaos to his advantage, targeting the next warehouse with the same precision. Coordination, intelligence, and timing allowed the crew to maintain the element of surprise. Several key lieutenants were captured or neutralized, and Dritan's communication lines were disrupted. For the first time, it seemed that the Kingpin's control was faltering. Even with this success, Connor knew that Dritan himself remained a ghost. He was always one step ahead, avoiding direct confrontation while manipulating events from the shadows. Yet the strike had a psychological impact. Dritan's men became cautious, second-guessing their moves, while Connor's crew gained renewed confidence. Liverpool's underworld began to sense a shift in power. The balance was no longer entirely in Dritan's favor. By dawn, Connor surveyed the aftermath. The streets were quieter, but the message was clear. The Harrington crew had returned, stronger and smarter, capable of challenging even the most ruthless opponent. While Dritan Leka remained at large, his empire had been shaken. Connor understood that this war was far from over, but for the first time, he had hope. Intelligence, strategy, and careful planning had turned the tide, proving that even a ghost as elusive as Dritan could be disrupted. Liverpool's streets would never be the same again, and the underworld now faced a leader who understood that in war, brains could triumph over brawn, and that every move, every shadow, and every decision could determine survival. The war had stretched across months, leaving Liverpool's streets scarred and its underworld transformed. Connor Blade Riley stood in the shadows of a quiet warehouse, surveying the aftermath of the strikes that had finally weakened Dritan Leka's empire. Though the Albanian Mafia king had vanished without a trace, the impact of his operations and the chaos left in his wake was undeniable. Liverpool's gangs had learned a harsh lesson. Control could be challenged, alliances were fragile, and survival depended as much on intelligence as on violence. Connor felt a mix of relief and weariness. Victory was never absolute in this world, and even now, danger lingered like a shadow over every street corner. The Albanian Mafia's sudden disappearance left questions that no one could answer. Rumors spread quickly. Some said Dritan had returned to Europe, regrouping his forces. Others claimed he had embedded himself in smaller criminal operations, waiting for the right moment to strike again. For the residents and criminals of Liverpool, these rumors created unease. Even those who had never been involved in gangs could feel the tension. The streets had become a chessboard, and every move carried risk. Connor knew that Dritan's legacy was not just the violence he inflicted, but the fear he instilled, a reminder that control could be fleeting, and threats could appear from the most unexpected corners. Connor's crew worked tirelessly to reclaim territories and rebuild alliances. Some gangs that had switched sides during the height of Dritan's influence returned to loyalty, recognizing that survival depended on unity. Connor emphasized intelligence and planning, teaching his men to anticipate threats, gather information, and operate with caution. The tactics that had been essential in the war against Dritan became the new standard, transforming the Harrington crew from a traditional street gang into a disciplined strategic force. Liverpool's underworld had evolved, shaped by the shadow of the Albanian king and the lessons learned through blood and betrayal. Selena, Viper Hayes, whose involvement had been critical, quietly retreated after the final operations. her part in the war complete, Connor understood the importance of her departure. Alliances in this world were temporary, and every partnership carried potential danger. Her intelligence and insight had tipped the balance, but her exit was a reminder that trust was rare, and even those who aided him could vanish without warning. The streets were calmer, but the memory of the conflict lingered, a silent warning that the next threat could arrive at any time. In the months that followed, Liverpool slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the scars of the war remained. Buildings still bore marks of gunfire, warehouses were abandoned or repurposed, and those who survived carried the memories of the violence. Connor walked these streets with a heightened awareness, knowing that dominance was never permanent. Dritan Leka had vanished, but the story of his rise, his meticulous operations, and the fear he inspired became a cautionary tale whispered in alleys, bars, and criminal networks. The war had ended not with a final showdown, but with a balance of power restored through strategy, survival, and intelligence. Connor had survived, his crew remained intact, and Liverpool's streets had been reclaimed, but the underworld had changed forever. Fear, respect, and caution replaced reckless violence as the guiding principles of dominance. Dritan Leka's shadow may have disappeared, but his legacy endured, a chilling reminder that in the world of organized crime, control was fragile, power was fleeting, and the next war could begin at any moment. The criminal landscape had been forever altered, and Liverpool would never forget the war that shook it to its core.